Hey everyone, Brandon here with the Worktapes podcast. I wanted to take a second and tell you about artistand.org. If there's one thing I love about writing in Nashville, it's the community it creates. But let's face it, we all need each other, and artists are not just artists anymore. We're songwriters, we're content creators, marketing managers, booking agents, social media experts, and we're doing it all at the same time. A lot of us are doing it by ourselves. It can be discouraging and it can burn you out really fast. Award-winning veteran songwriters Krista Wells and Nicole Witt are building a community through Artist&, that will champion your craft. Artist&, is helping artists of all backgrounds not only expand their mindset and open their hearts, but to actively live into their creative dreams. And they're doing this through a variety of online and in-person opportunities to connect and create within a community. Visit artistand.org to learn how you can become a part of artist development, vision meetings, writing prompts, annual songwriters retreats, coaching, and a whole lot more. So whether you're a professional artist and you're feeling stuck, or you're an up-and-coming artist and not sure where to start, or you're just feeling overwhelmed by it all, visit artistand.org and learn how you can become part of a movement of people coming alive through creativity and authentic connection. Artistand.org. Let them know Brandon from Worktapes sent you. Welcome to Worktapes. This is a podcast where we tear apart songs. Why was the song written? What's it about? What's the context and emotion behind it? Where were you at the time? What were you going through? How did certain lines come to you? What's the inspiration? How long did it take to write? I'm Brandon Carswell, and I'm fascinated with songwriting and how songs are built from the ground up. It's easy to hear a full production song on the radio and dismiss its origin story. I want to hear the rough draft of the song or the work tape. I want to explore the very beginning of how songs that move us and make us move are born. All right, everyone, welcome to Worktapes. This is Brandon once again. Today's episode is going to be fun. We are sitting with a Grammy-nominated songwriter who has co-writes with people like Hayley Williams, Josh Farro of Paramore, Nick Jonas, Ray Lynn, Michael W. Smith, Stephanie Gretzinger, Kieran, and a lot more.
Sick, dude.
I did my homework.
It's awesome. You did your homework, man.
Welcome, Leeland.
Dude, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
I've been a fan of yours for a long time. And so I'm so excited to talk to you, to meet you. We've tried to get this rolling for since August at least.
Yeah. Thanks for being patient.
Oh, everyone's schedule is wild.
Yeah.
So I get it, man.
Yeah. Dad with 2 kids is a whole deal.
I remember, I kind of remember some of the first times I heard Sound of Melodies.
Nice.
That first record. So I was in and out of leading worship in my teenage years, and then I would do it here and there whenever it called for it. But and then I did it at a church for about a year when I lived in North Carolina. And some of the songs on the first and second records were go-tos for me to choose from.
Nice.
I won't remember all the titles, but man, I loved listening to those. I loved playing those because I grew up in, probably like yourself, our parents were music directors in churches, so we were immersed in that world.
Okay.
And easily jaded by the music of church, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't that we didn't appreciate it or think it was good, but a lot of it was just like, okay, I'm tired now.
Yeah. Where'd you guys grow up? Where was that at?
Well, we grew up between Nashville and North Carolina.
Oh, wow.
In the Raleigh area.
So you guys are like Nashville unicorns then.
We are.
You're like, because there's not many people that are from here.
Yeah, me and my brother are both from Nashville.
Sick.
We're still here, but we did live in North Carolina for a long time.
Nice. Was it kind of like more AG, Southern?
Yes.
Kind of charismatic?
We were, my parents always worked in, I think the longest stint they had was in a Church of God.
Oh, wow.
Like Pentecostal church.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, super charismatic. But they would over the years took other jobs in different churches. But I say all that to say, when I came across your stuff, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was like, oh, this sounds like a band. This is a band.
Wow.
This doesn't sound like the regular, like worship music that I'm used to. Like the 90s Hillsong stuff that got super worn out.
Yeah.
Granted, some of those songs are great and
amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
But again, for me, I'm just speaking in my little angle.
Yeah.
I was worn out.
Yeah.
And so I was listening to bands like U2 and Travis and Radiohead and all of this stuff. And then when I heard your stuff, I was like, oh, they listen to that stuff for sure.
All those same bands.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's funny is actually, this is so cool. Cause like I think I posted the other day on, I don't know how long ago this was, on Instagram, just going, cause I'm 36.
Yeah.
So when our band started, I was the baby in the band. I was like 16 when we started like coming up to Nashville and working on demos as a band and writing with other writers. And so I was just a kid, but our drummer Mike is the one who got us kind of all into like really cool bands. So
that's cool.
And then we had another buddy here in town, actually.
Shout out to Mike. We were just talking about Mike before.
Smith, we were. He is a G, man. He's awesome. Still to this day, one of the best drummers I've ever played with. And so Mike was like always into cool bands. Like he got us into Travis, and there was a band actually called Kent from the UK that we were super into.
I remember Kent.
And there's a few other bands that he got us into. I mean, obviously the OK Computer record from Radiohead blew all of our minds. And then we had another friend, I can't remember his name, but it was like a friend of a friend in Nashville that was like always on the edge of like what bands were coming out. So I guess he was, this is when people were like reading blogs to get their information,
right?
Like,
yeah.
Twitter was like barely a thing, and everyone was still on MySpace.
That's what I was
gonna say. The way you got your info about like cool bands was either you subscribed to a magazine like Relevant or something kind of cool that was like telling you about new bands, or you just got on a blog and you had to know about the blog. Somebody had to tell you about it. And so he was a friend of ours that like followed a bunch of these blogs. And so he told us about Keen for the first time.
Oh yeah. You guys do have a little Keen feel sometimes.
Well, it was so crazy because we were freaking out because of the harmonies, the dual singer thing that was happening on Keen, all the melodies. And then we heard the whole backstory of like the keys player originally getting invited to be a part of Coldplay. Before they were Coldplay, and he like turned it down.
I didn't know that. Oh, that's a good story.
It's a whole story, like I guess, and I keep blanking on everybody's names, but it's you have the is it Tom, the lead singer of Keen? Tom.
I don't know.
Anyways, his best friend or the keys player in Keen, I guess, was one of the primary songwriters, and you can kind of tell like he's chordal genius, melody nerd.
Yes.
And I guess he was from the same town or from one of the same areas as like Chris Martin from Coldplay, and I guess Chris invited him to be in the band, to join the band and be the keys player.
Can you imagine?
And he was like, I'm gonna butcher the British accent. I'm already in a band. It's called Keen.
That was pretty good.
Yeah. Well, and so so like we just were listening. I came to like into bands kind of late because we grew up probably pretty similar, you and I, and I grew up in East Texas, like outside of Houston, kind of like Baytown is where we're from. And then just east of that is a town called Beaumont in like Nederland, Texas, which is on the way to Louisiana. So we grew up watching mom and dad lead worship. And my dad is like a keys player. He's still to this day one of the best piano players I've ever seen play. And we grew up watching him kind of like director, the MD the bands from either like a Roland 90s and Sonic that had like all the sick horn sounds on it,
right?
The brass, stabs and stuff. Or it was like he was on a B3, like a Hammond B3, and then my mom, she's like still to this day a great singer, a singer. So she would kind of direct these big choirs, and all about it. In the 90s, it was like choir music.
It was choirs. That's what our parents were exactly the same.
It's crazy,
piano,
dude.
Singer, directing choirs.
So my dad is like, and still is this way, like just very quiet, very sweet, and like love serving people.
We don't have the same dad.
Okay.
We might.
We might, dude. This is wild. This is crazy. And then my mom she's the life of the party.
Yeah.
You know, like full on Texan mom. Yeah. At the time she had big hair, you know.
Yeah.
So that's what we grew up around. And so we, you know, I grew up on like it was the church we were in East Texas was like, I remember it being like half and half. Like it was 50% black, 50% white, right down the middle. So the church was like, we were either doing black gospel or Southern gospel music, and that was kind of it. So, which is awesome. I mean, there's great things about both those genres of music. So we were either like singing Gaither stuff, or we were singing like, you know, some quartets music, or we were singing, you know, John P. Key, you know.
Yeah.
And
Can you please do a side project with like Gaithers? That'd be so sick.
Dude, I don't know what
those vocals are like, intense.
Dude.
Yeah.
Some of those guys, like Guy Penrod and all those dudes, man. So we were like, me and my brother, and my little sister, we were nerds about like vocal groups. Isn't that funny? Like, like vocal groups were our thing. We were like we all had our favorite in the Gaithers that we liked. And like, I loved Donnie McClurkin. I still love him and his music. And I loved that he memorized all these hymns, and he would get up. So this church was kind of like a bigger church at the time in East Texas for like those towns. So all those big preachers in the 90s or even artists would come through the church and hold like meetings and stuff. So like Donnie McClurkin, I remember he came in and led, and it was unbelievable. It was so good. But, you know, in between songs, he would just transition with old hymns, and like was like a walking hymnal. Just crazy that he could memorize that many. It was insane.
Oh yeah.
And so, so like we got into bands kind of late. Like I remember being like 14 and listening to like my first, you know, Beatles album and just losing my mind.
How old were you when you heard something like that for the
I think
first
it was
time?
about 14. I think I was 13 when I heard Delirious for the first time.
Okay.
And that might have been the Glow album.
Yep.
And I just lost it. It was like Delirious, and then I listened to Third Day that same year when I was about 13. It was the Offerings live album.
Okay.
So I had like 3 CDs. I remember like on the Sony, you know, with what were the headphones that like would go around the back of your neck? Remember those?
Oh yeah, kind of.
They kind of on your ear. I don't know if they're Walkmans or something like that. And so I had Third Day Offerings live. I had what was that? I just said Delirious Glow, and then I had Michael W. Smith's instrumental record called Freedom.
Yeah.
And I loved that. I grew up on like drums as my first instrument. So like I loved the drums on that record.
Okay.
And yeah, so those are the first kind of band non-Southern gospel and black gospel music that I listened to that I was like geeking out over.
Yeah.
And then I've heard about U2 and
the
Beatles, and the whole nother world opened up.
Were those like the first kind of records, like Christian records would have been like the first, or gospel records were the first ones you were listening to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how old, because you started in music really young. You started touring and doing this stuff really young.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to get into what inspired you to start writing, and when did that happen? Because if you started young and those first Leeland records were so good as they were, you must have developed for some years before that. And what led into that?
It's crazy. Well, okay, so I'm 36 now, and I look back, and I have 2 kids and 2 girls, and then we have one on the way, which is we're excited.
Oh, congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah.
2 girls, they're 6 and 3, and then we have a boy on the way. So we're like pumped. I'm excited to be a boy dad. But, I look back now, and me and my wife have been married for over 15 years. I just kind of go like, my parents were probably looked insane to people. Like, and I mean that in the best, like as a compliment. They said yes to the craziest thing. I realize that my childhood upbringing is actually not normal, and right. I mean that in the best of ways. Like, okay, so all of us siblings, my older brother and little sister, we're all 3 years apart. So when I was 11, my brother was 14, my sister was 9-ish, 8 or 9. My parents were leading worship at this big church in East Texas, and they were fired like out of nowhere. It was kind of my first time seeing like maybe the uglier side of church politics and stuff.
Yeah.
So we were in this house in our neighborhood. The day that my dad got fired, the night before, our neighborhood was hit by like this crazy lightning storm. So there was no power in the neighborhood. So we got like this motel, and this cheap motel. Dad left to go to work to the office. It was a Tuesday, and he came back like an hour later. And Mom was like, "What happened?" He's like, "Well, they gave me a severance check." And my dad is like, we affectionately call my dad, we don't do it anymore, but around then we used to call my dad Jesus. Because he's just, when I tell you, he's the kindest man you'll ever meet, and just he loves to serve people. So the idea of somebody like having a problem with my dad is like, that's like Mars, it's a sci-fi. It doesn't make sense to me. So my dad walks in, and they have a severance check, and I was like 11. I didn't know what that was. That was like a bonus check. Yeah. So I was like, a severance check, sick. Let's go to like Toys R Us. So finding out that, he was fired, I remember my mom and my dad, my mom just started laughing. Like, she's like, they fired us? And she just starts laughing. And Dad starts laughing, and then all of us kids are like, we kind of start laughing with them.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, guys, we need to pray. So like we prayed as a family, just asking God for help. And then about a week later, some friends of my parents from Corpus Christi reached out to my mom and my dad and were like, hey, we heard what happened. We're not in a place to hire anybody, but we have like this young, really talented team, but they're really green. They've got a lot of gifting. Would you guys consider moving here for like 3 to 6 months, and we'll pay you contracted rates to just teach them?
Yeah.
So we were like, well, we don't have anything else to do, so let's go. So my parents pulled us out of school, got our homeschooling material, which homeschooling is kind of cool now. It's like all libertarian now.
Right, yeah.
Back then it was like just weird.
Yes.
It was borderline like, gonna have the CPS calling you for homeschooling your child. So we kind of moved to Corpus. We're like in this rental house for like 6 months. And while we're there at this church, my parents helping train this team, there were like these series back to back of revival style Pentecostal meetings at the church. So the first guy that came, who's an evangelist, his name is Nigel McNeil, and his wife's name is Kathy, and they're from Budrum, the Mooloolaba like coast in Aussie.
Uh-huh.
But they apparently would come to the States for 3 months, travel around, preach the gospel on the road, and then go back, and they would do that every 3 months. And so they just kind of really love America and felt called to the country. So they're there at this church preaching. My parents are leading worship with this team. And on the last night, my cousin, the services were great. So my mom's like calls her sister and all of her kids, which she has 5 kids, all my cousins. She's like, you guys need to drive down to Corpus. These meetings are amazing. You should come on the last night. So on the last night, he lines up my whole family, this Aussie, Nigel, and prays for every member of my family, all my cousins. When he gets to me and my brother, he said, I see you guys like starting a band and writing songs together and leading people in worship. And so we were like, that's cool, And then
you hadn't done anything like that.
No, we would sing specials with my mom and my dad. Like they could bribe us to sing like, I'll get you a dog if you sing in this Christmas play thing. So music was in the house.
Had you done anything at that revival that he would have seen?
I think I might have sang one song. Like I think it was like it was actually, I know exactly what song it was now. It was a song, I Believe I Can Fly.
Really?
By R. Kelly, which is so amazing. So I was singing I Believe I Can Fly for like an offering special.
I love that.
And anyway, so he's speaks over us, and then like about like maybe a month later, another couple comes to the church and does the same thing, but they're from Texas. This Dale and Jean Gentry. So they come and they do the same thing. My cousins come on the last night, and he like speaks over me and my brother and says basically the same thing.
Yeah.
And so a couple of weeks later, we're kind of coming near the end of our time there, and this Aussie calls my mom and my dad, Nigel, and says, hey, like, we're going to be in the States for 3 months. And usually the teams that are leading worship at these places are awful.
Yeah.
I mean, this is before the resourcing of the American church, when Baytown, Texas, where I'm from, sounded like Baytown, Texas.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Now everyone has multi-tracks and
Sure.
is really trained, and everyone sounds great now. So he was like, hey, can you guys come out and do the music? And it's just 3 months. And we'll road trip around, and we'll take up offerings for you guys. So we packed up our Lincoln Town Car. My parents just said yes. They were like, and everyone thought they were crazy. So we packed up like our Lincoln Town Car. We had like an ice chest in the middle, and we already had our homeschooling material, and so it was us 3 kids in the back. And my dad, so my mom was, mom and dad had said yes, but they're kind of like, what did we just say yes to? Because not only are our kids going to be like on the road with us, we don't have a band, we don't have singers, we're used to having choirs, all these things.
Yeah.
And they just kind of felt like, you use the arrows you already have. You have your kids. So my mom brought me and my brother. My sister was like, I'm not singing a thing. She was like 9. She's like, I'm not doing anything. So she brought me and my brother to the room, and we were like 11 and 14. And she was like, I know you guys can sing, but I'm going to teach you how to like really sing, like harmonize. The way mom teaches choirs, I'm going to teach you guys. And she was like, Jack, you're going to sing tenor. And his voice was changing,
Yeah.
Leeland, you're going to sing alto. And so we learned I think 20 songs over the course of a couple of days in her bedroom, listening to these tracks.
Yeah.
And they were like Southern gospel music, Black gospel music, a little bit of Hillsong, like maybe 2 or 3 songs, like Shout to the Lord. And and then my dad had a friend like make some tracks, or they made some on a keyboard at his house, like drums and bass. And he had like a garage, like mini disc player studio where you could put things on mini discs.
Yeah.
And so that was our band. And then my dad played keys. So we packed up the car, and we thought it was going to be like 3 months, a fun, crazy adventure with the family, be in these revival meetings, do our homeschooling stuff in the morning, and then church, or in the middle of the day, church morning and night.
Yeah.
Road trip for a couple of days to the next spot. And those 3 months turned into like 2.5 years, basically.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And so when the Aussie couple went back to Australia, the other couple that came to that church, Dale and Jean from Texas, called us up and we're like, we heard what you're doing with Nigel. You guys want to come join us? We're going to be in Oklahoma next week.
Yeah.
So that's what we did.
Wow.
And so we were kind of like a family trio, singing trio. And my mom would lead worship. And so, but these meetings were very they were very spontaneous, it wasn't so much like the movies. It was very spontaneous and very, it was either really funny things happening or like really awesome things. We talked a little bit off camera, but like I have friends that kind of grew up, friends of friends that sort of grew up similar-ish and had a lot of weird experience, like a lot of bad experiences.
Yeah.
I mentioned this earlier, but for some reason, I'm 36 now and I'm still unpacking all of that. Honestly, like over 90% of it was amazing.
Yeah.
And there might have been some weird things here and there that some people said or did.
Back then I feel like, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like the majority of what we were experiencing, you didn't really question it very much.
Sure.
The good or the bad. It was just kind of like, oh, well, this is how it is.
Sure. And I think, as you get older, you can start unpacking that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And nowadays, I think everyone is questioning everything all the time.
Yeah.
Not just in church, but just
everywhere.
Therapy life and mental health and all of the things that are kind of buzzwords now. Not to speak down to those things, but we're focusing in on so much of that stuff and how it impacts us culturally. And back in the 80s and 90s, we weren't really doing that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It does kind of feel like now that sort of in the air that we all breathe is like a collective distrust of every major institution.
Yeah, which could be a bad thing in some ways.
It can be.
And in some ways,
a good thing.
It can be a healthy thing to look at and have your doubts and your questions and get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was in those environments that I started to get melody ideas, and I didn't know that was songwriting. We would just be in these services, and so there's lots of, I'll tell some funny stories, but I want to tell one crazy one that was really cool. Okay. So, in the charismatic world, I guess it's, some of these things are like the gifts of the Spirit. One of them is called the prophetic.
Right. And
I've seen plenty of people do weird stuff and call it prophetic. But some of the stuff that happened when we were kids was really wild stuff that were I have no explanation for it except, something supernatural. So in one of those nights, Dale Gentry, that other couple from Texas, he didn't call himself a prophet. So he never said, I'm a prophet. He loved to talk about prayer. He still does. He's in his 80s now and doesn't travel anymore, but he preaches online about prayer all the time and how to pray. And so he would talk about prayer, and then at the end of the night he would pray for people on the altar or around the building, and he would, sure enough, start prophesying over people or saying whatever he heard. And almost every night he would prophesy over me and my brother, or at least pray for us. And so there was one night where he looked at me and my brother Jack, and he said, I see you guys leading worship in a baseball stadium. And then I see thousands of people coming to the baseball field and giving their life to Jesus or dedicating their lives to Jesus. And I see you guys singing while that's happening. And he's like, and then he kind of moved on. And I was 11. And, fast forward, I don't know how many years this was, 6 years later. I think I was 17 or 18, maybe it was 7 years later. And we were in Anaheim with Harvest Crusade at the Anaheim Angels baseball stadium. And me and my brother were out right field, and we were going to do sound check that day. And we called him.
Oh, wow.
We call him Papa Dale, in our families. So we called him. We were like, hey, we're standing in right field right now at a baseball stadium. And I think there was 4,000 people that came down and made decisions to follow Christ that night. And, but it was wild. And so it's stuff like that, and a lot of other things. There was one, this is crazy. There was one, we were in this one meeting with my mom and dad and this church in West Texas somewhere, this small church.
Yeah.
And this woman was preaching. Her name is Nancy Cohen, and she's amazing. She was preaching, and her life is a bit it's a bit like the Book of Acts, right? And so just wild stories, so the whole room is on the edge of their seat listening to this stuff. It was amazing. But one night she just looked at me and my brother, and she said, hey, can you guys come out here? And she said, does anybody have a map in the room? And somebody was like, we got one in the youth room. And so they grabbed those plastic youth group maps, She had a stand on it, and she said, I hear the sound of melodies traveling all over the world, the nations of the world. And she said, okay, you guys can go sit back down now. And then we sat back down, and she kind of went and did her thing.
Yeah.
We totally forgot about that. I was 11 when that happened, until our band was in Nashville working on our EP with the producer Steve Wilson here in town. And we were working on a song called Sound of Melodies, which ended up becoming the title track of our record. And my mom, after we had worked on that song and played the EP for her, she was going through, she said, you guys aren't going to believe this. She said, but I have written in my journal, the date, the day, the time.
And you had forgotten all about it.
Forgotten all about it. And she said, I wrote in quotation marks what she said over you guys in that meeting.
Yeah.
So we had lots of cool stuff like that happen that was just kind of okay, I can argue that all day long, or I can just believe and accept what I experience as being from God and being real. And then also laugh at the crazy stuff. So plenty of that,
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were, so in these I'll get to the songwriting bit in a second.
No, you're good.
Can I tell you a crazy
this
story?
This is fun, yeah.
Okay, so,
I'm good.
All right, so we were, when we were with Nigel or with Dale, most of the time we were going to churches that they had relationships with for years. And so it was like they would introduce us to these pastors they had known for a long time. So it was really chill. But there was this one trip in particular where Nigel, the Aussie, was like, hey guys, so where we're going at this next place was in Bellingham, Washington, I think. He was like, I don't know these guys at all. I don't know this pastors. I don't know anything about this church. So if it's crazy, please forgive me. It's not my fault. I'm just as new to this as you guys are. So we make this road trip from Baytown, Texas, which is, Houston essentially, all the way to Bellingham, Washington, which is, the most northwesterly tip of the country.
Okay.
We road trip it in our Lincoln Town Car. I have no clue how this thing made it that far. My dad was pumped about the drive because he's a bit of a road dog. He was a truck driver before. So he loves like the road. And so this is before iPhones, obviously. So it's really the Atlas maps. So my dad had those big maps. So we were planning out the route, and he was like, we're going to go through Yellowstone, make a big trip out of it. And it was epic. We had fun. We took our time. So we were like a couple weeks on the road. We finally get to Bellingham. We roll in. I didn't know, but found this out later. My dad and mom had like $10 in their pocket. So we get to this church, and like always, we get there early to sound check before the meeting starts. So we go inside this church, and there are like 5 women with kind of the lights dimmed and some worship music going in this kind of like, sort of like strip mall church. And they're praying, I guess they're like the intercessor team or whatever. And so they come towards the front and they see us walk in. They said, and there was a woman who was kind of like leading the prayer group. And so she sees us and she says, I'm gonna try to do her voice, but I'm gonna butcher it. She's like, "Oh, you guys must be Majestic Praise," and so we're like, that was our family. Okay. I forgot to mention that was our family band name. Okay, Majestic Praise. So I love it. And so we're like, yeah, that's us. And she said, are you guys about to sound check? And we're like, yeah, we're about to sound check. And so she says, well, quickly let us pray with you guys. And so we get in a circle. And we're holding hands, and this is really normal. We're like, okay, we're going to pray, So we hold hands, everyone. We're in a circle, and my brother and sister are next to me, and she starts off the prayer, right? And it's like, God, we thank you for Majestic Praise. We thank you, God, thank you, Lord, that they're here. And it was really sweet. And she's like, and we thank you, God, that they are the missing piece to the symphony of what you're doing in our city. And I'm like 11. I'm like, that's awesome. Yeah, God, we'll be the missing piece of the symphony. That's amazing. That's got to keep in mind, like 11, we've seen a lot already, like been on the road for like a year, And so we're like, cool. Yes, God. And we're kind of amening. And then the next 4 ladies just kind of have like these northern kind of real high pitched voices. And the next lady pipes up and she's like, yes, God, we do thank you for Majestic Praise. We do believe they are the missing piece to the symphony of what you're doing. But also, God, we just want the whole hunk of meat. We want the whole hunk of meat of what you're doing this week, God, in our midst. We don't want a part of it. We want the whole hunk. And she keeps saying a hunk of meat. And I'm like 11, just going like, okay, maybe she's talking about the word of God, maybe. And so I'm like amening. Then the third lady, kind of popcorn prayer, third lady starts and she says, yes, God, we do think they're the missing piece of the symphony. We do want the whole hunk of meat this week. But also, God, we do pray for the digestive juices of your spirit to flow so that we can digest the meat of your word, God, the whole hunk. And so she's going on about digestive juices. At this point, I'm kind of like opening my eyes. I'm like, are mom and dad into this? Like, what's going on? And so they're kind of like looking at us like, y'all be quiet, close your eyes. And so then there's like a 4th lady. She starts praying. She's like, God, and yes, Lord, we do want the juices of your spirit to flow. We want to be able to digest the hunk of meat of your word. We also believe, God, I also just sense, Lord, that there's a new flavor in the air. There's a new flavor this week. And the last lady that hadn't said anything the entire time kind of caps it off. And she goes, it's coconut. Coconut's the flavor of what you're doing, God. And so literally at this point, I mean, all three of us kids, we're just laughing. We're laughing out loud. The lady that started us off, the sort of leader, is like, yes, God, more joy, more joy.
More joy.
We're like, yeah, we do have joy. So that was just a prayer service. And we're like, this church is going to be awesome. We're going to have some stories to tell. So we get into the first service and, we have like tracks and piano. And it's like this, smaller church where the platform's kind of small. We're kind of like in the pit with everyone, in the altar with everyone. And we're singing like, lift up the name of Jesus, shout it everywhere you go. That kind of stuff, like gospel music, or Southern gospel music. And so the altar gets filled with all sorts of people, really characters, they're ready to worship, but they're just doing everyone's kind of doing oddball stuff. So there's a woman who, as she's singing, she'll just be worshiping and then she'll just strike a pose and like just no emotion on the face. And for an entire song, 5-6 minutes, she wouldn't move until the song changed, and then she would move again and hit another pose and then stay there for another 7 minutes or whatever.
That is amazing.
So that's happening. There was a guy down there with like the MC Hammer pants from like the 90s.
Yeah.
What are those parachute pants?
Yeah,
what are
yeah.
those called?
Parachute pants.
He had those on and some wooden like what's the percussion instrument? The blocks. It's like the wooden blocks, you hit them together.
I don't know what those are called.
But I mean, most people probably know what they are. They're louder than any PA.
They're so loud.
They're like 140 dB when you hit them. So he had those and a vest, and he would like, dance like 90s dance, and then he would look at us and just go cluck cluck, and just in the middle of the song and not. And then there was someone down there that was.
This sounds like a movie.
It's like a movie. This all happened at the same time. So keep in mind. So there was someone down there that was acting like they were pulling out arrows, like bow and arrow, like I guess in the spirit or imagination. They have a quiver behind them of sorts, and they're pulling out an arrow and shooting over our heads, And so all this is happening at the exact same time, dude. And I'm like 11. We're like singing these songs and just going like, this is our first time experiencing all this at the same time. So we're trying to hold together. There was a woman who would come up every night, and this was like. By like night 2 and 3, we realized, she's going to do this again. I don't know if she came off the street or from wherever, but she had like a really short skirt on, and she would just fall on the altar and throw her legs up. And so then the ushers have to come down, throw claws over her to keep her from showing everyone everything. So all this is happening, dude. It's wild. Okay, this is like night 1. So by night 4 or 5, we're pretty tired and like just like where are we? Come to find out, I guess the team, the pastoral team wanted to lead worship on the last night, and I don't know if they just didn't like us because we were singing like Southern gospel stuff. I think they were more of like a prophetic kind of vineyard style. Okay. So maybe what we were doing was a little too like professionally sounding. We had tracks and stuff like that. So. We were like, yes, please let them lead. We would love to have like a night off. So on the last night, the pastor and the whole team hop up there, and there's like, I don't know, I'm exaggerating, but 12, 13 of them, there's a lot of them. There's multiple guitars, there's multiple rain sticks, there's percussion set, and it's a small platform. Sticks. There's a whole thing. It's an army of people.
Flags maybe?
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's flags everywhere. Flags are standard, So they start strumming, and I think this is the pastor of the church, starts strumming in the key of D, and just going da-na-na, da-na-na, da-na, and he starts singing something like, live my whole life in sin. I was living for the devil every night and day, and I never got 1 minute of sleep. I was done for the something about in the whole songs. And I'm like 11. I'm going like, I think that's Rolling on the River. But it's just Christian lyrics about like running from the Lord.
Classic, yeah.
So before the chorus hits, during the entire verse of the song, everyone from the whole church, there's a few hundred people, everyone's getting out of their seat during the verse of the song and are all walking like on cue down to the altar and lining up like sardines, the altar like this.
Yeah.
And so before the first chorus gets to it, the band just kind of goes, and they're just on a kick drum, and the pastor sort of looks at us because the whole church is in the altar, and he says, "Guys, majestic praise. There's no spectators in this church, only participators."
Oh,
and so
that's my nightmare.
My dad looks at us and says, "Guys, get down there. We got to get our check."
Oh my God!
So
we got $10 in our pocket.
I didn't know that.
Whatever they're about to do, we're doing it. Too.
So we all get down the altar and they start going, and we're rolling, and everyone starts rolling in unison, left to right, throughout the altar while we're singing "Rolling the River," bro. Just wild stuff. So
what's the lyric? Rolling on the river.
And we're rolling on the river, like the river of the Lord, you know,
the river of God.
Yeah, the river of God, the river of the Spirit. So like, you know, we had like epic, crazy stories like that happen. And what we do is we just, if anything really weird happened or really strange that we didn't really understand or was kind of funny, we would just talk about Mom and Dad, like, that was kind of crazy when that happened. What'd you get? And Mom and Dad were like, yeah, it was a little strange. I don't know what that really meant. And we just learned to laugh at the stuff that was strange or weird.
Yeah.
And move on, you know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, really cherish the things that are really good. Or if something was really dysfunctional, then we're like, okay, that actually is a little dangerous.
Right.
Kids don't ever, you know, whatever. So like, but for the most part, it was really good.
Yeah.
Or really funny. And so we had these amazing stories. So, but in these meetings, that's where like the good ones, you know, not the crazy ones, but the good ones, I would just get like little melody ideas and I would try to remember them because I had no way of like capturing them.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would sing it for my dad. I remember this one meeting, I got this melody idea and sang it for my dad. At the house we were staying at, somebody let us stay in their house, and they had like an upright piano in their house. And so my dad was playing on it, and I was like, hey, I got this melody last night in the service. And so I was singing it for him, and he would like put chords to it.
Okay.
And then my mom was like, what are y'all singing? We're like, well, Dad's like, it's a melody Leeland got last night in the service. And she said, do you have any lyrics for it? And I was like, I've got like one word. And it's like the word shine, like I want to like shine the light of the gospel or something, you know? Mm-hmm. And so my mom's like, okay, what does that mean to shine? And so she's pressing now and pulling like words out. So we start talking about it. And so she's kind of helped me with lyrics and what the song's saying. And so I didn't know that that's what co-writing was.
Was anyone else a writer in your family?
Yeah. So my brother ended up kind of following suit. Like as him and I would, in these meetings, we would get melody ideas and stuff. And then my brother started getting stuff. And so my parents got both of us like these like early digital recorders. Mm-hmm. They were like, you can get them at Radio Shack, you know? Yep. They're like these little gold, you know, things, recording 001, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's what we had. We just, you know, would have them in service and we'd put stuff down and try to listen back if it was good or not.
Yeah.
And so they were already kind of like teaching us to kind of have our antennas up. And so about 2.5 years of that goes by, and we had, this is near the tail end of that where songs would start kind of happening. So when we came back home to Baytown, Texas, we weren't sure what was next for our family. My dad had a friend who was an electrician in Denver and had this whole electrician business, and he just loved my dad. And he was like, I really don't want to work with anybody else. I know you don't know anything about being an electrician, but I'll teach you.
Yeah.
It's a great job. You know, it's like over $100,000 a year. It was like this nice job with health insurance, and you get to live in Denver, and it's cool. Like, mm-hmm. And so we were actually thinking about doing that. And then my parents were weighing that up, and my dad and mom were praying. And they're like, I think we're supposed to start meeting with people in our house. So my dad turned down this job.
Yeah.
We started a church in our house essentially. And that's where our band started. It was me and my brother, Jack.
Okay.
At the time I was 14 and he was 17. And we started just meeting with our older cousins. They were we were still homeschooled, but our cousins were normal. They were going to normal public school.
Yeah.
So we didn't know anyone when we moved back to Baytown. We just come off the road. So we just told our cousins, we were like, hey, can you guys bring your friends to our youth meeting in our house? We didn't know anybody, so just bring your friends.
Yeah.
And so our cousins started bringing people, and that's how our band started. We were just, me and my brother, just writing songs in our house and around our piano.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, that's kind of the beginning of what song. We didn't even know what that co-writing was even a word.
Right. Right.
When we started doing that together.
Let me ask you this. You're doing those years of traveling with your family and you're getting the melody ideas. What type of, what artists or writers would you have been listening to during that stint? Like mostly maybe, what you were singing, like you're drawing from, but can you give us like examples of songs or songwriters that maybe at the time you didn't even know who they were?
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple of black gospel artists. Like one was John P. Key. He had a record called Any Day. I think that was the name of the record, or he had a song on the record called Any Day that we would jam all the time. And it was really good. There was a singer, another black gospel singer named, I might be getting the name wrong, Daryl Cooley. And he had a song, I think the title of the song was What's in That Name? And it was just an awesome song about the name of Jesus. And there were some Southern gospel artists we'd listened to around that time, a couple of quartet kind of groups, vocal groups, blanking on some of their names. We were listening to one of Hillsong's first, one of the early live records. I think it was a record called You Are Near.
Okay.
And I had like Reuben Morgan and Darlene leading everything on it. I think Marty even sang a song on it when he was like 16. And so we were listening to that record. That was kind of blowing our mind. And then there was and then there was, who else were we listening to around that time? Blanking on the name. I had something else in my mind, but I'll think about it in a second. It was essentially just groups like that. That's that's all right. There's another one. There was a live worship album from Lyndall Cooley, who was, I guess, the worship leader at the, what was it called? In Pensacola, the Pensacola Revival, Brownsville.
Yeah, I remember that.
So he was the worship leader during all of that. And then he had moved, I don't know if he was already living in Nashville. I know he's here now, or in Franklin. But at the time he was somewhere, and he did like a live record that had some great like live worship songs, some kind of praise songs.
Yeah.
So we were into that. And so we were listening to that stuff, and then, and then just get these melody ideas and would.
Which is where I was going with it, because I want, for our listeners, like you and I share a friend named Kent Coley, and Kent, when I started talking to you about doing this episode, he would tell me like, oh, Leeland, he's like a monster of melodies. He's like a melody maker. He's just insane with melodies. And I agreed with him based on what I've heard your records. And so where I'm going with it is, however worship music was influenced, got to you.
Yeah. Like
whatever that thing is with the melodies and the hooks and the whatever that is, you obviously have a great voice as well. I'm interested in finding out, like, I like to take it all the way back. So not just those, like, that's why I asked, who were you listening to?
There was also the other one I remember now, the other one that I wanted to mention that was really left of center that we didn't know we had stumbled upon his music through a friend. No, we did listen to some Carmen. Like, I mean, it's just for fun.
I loved Carmen.
Carmen was awesome, man. And don't want no monsters.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this episode of Worktapes. We are going to do a part 2 with Leeland coming up really soon. We simply ran out of time and have so much to discuss. So in the next episode, tune in. We will hear from Leeland. His brother Jack is going to join us. We're going to hear the work tape of Still Mighty. It's going to be great, encouraging, funny. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe everywhere you listen to Worktapes. Worktapes is produced by me, Brandon Carswell. Filming and editing for this episode by Sean Carswell. Visit lelandonline.com for music, tour dates, chord charts, and booking info.